Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this afternoon's meeting of the Planning Committee. I'd like to read this out before we start. May I remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live via the internet, and the recording of which will be archived for future viewing as well. Before we get underway, I wonder if we could just stand for a minute's silence in respect of the tragedy at Grenfell Tower earlier week. Move on to item 1, apologies for absence. We had any apologies for absence?
All present and correct.
All present and correct. Brilliant. If I can move on to minutes of the last meeting. These were all circulated obviously prior to the meeting. Can I have someone to move those minutes? Thank you very much, Councillor Hodges and Councillor Bird. Move on to item 3 on the agenda to receive any declarations of interest. I'll go round to my left. I'll start with my Vice Chair.
I have an interest in the Aldi application.
Sorry, Chairman.
Declaration of interest on the...
It needs to state the nature of the interest.
Sorry, state the nature of the interest.
I own a property adjacent or opposite Aldi's.
Opposite the Unit 3 site, Unit 6.
I have a declaration of interest on the Aldi application as my spouse is an employee of the applicant.
Thank you, Councillor Cave.
Thank you, Chair. As a former member of the Barry Town Council Planning Committee, I was consulted on a number of applications within this agenda, including items 2116-00946 FUL, that's T-Ville on Industrial Estate, 2016-001092 FUL 18 Bronnerwell on Barry, and 2017-00082 FUL 332 Halton Road, Barry. As a new member of this committee, I am coming here today with a fresh pair of eyes based on the additional information provided in the bundle, and I will therefore be making fresh judgments based on that information. I would also like to inform the committee that I have a clash of events tonight as a result of this being a rearranged meeting, so I may be forced to leave at a point during this meeting in order to attend that event.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Parker.
I was the architect for the original scheme, and I will be leaving the room when that matter is considered.
Thank you very much. Any further declarations of interest? Okay, moving on to item 4 on the agenda is to note the report of the Public Right-of-Way Subcommittee, paper on the Public Right-of-Way Subcommittee. There's a requirement for us to nominate the subcommittee as per the recommendations in the report. Moved, second. Thank you very much. And report noting site inspections carried out for the committee for the meeting. Okay, thank you. Moving on to our delegated building regulations actions taken since the last meeting. Move and notes. Second, please. Thank you. And delegated planning applications since the last meeting. Seconder, please. Thank you. Now moving on to the appeals list, to note the appeals received, enforcement appeals received, and planning appeal decisions as well. Move and note the report. Okay, thank you, Councillor Penrose. Second. Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Final report for noting is the delegated powers around trees. Item number 9 on the agenda. Report to note. Thank you, Councillor. Second, Penrose. I'll move on to item 10.1, enforcement action in relation to Treasure Island and Funfair, Paget Road, Barry Island. This is page 48 in your packets.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Justina, who is the enforcement officer, is going to run through this report for us.
Thank you. This is a report that seeks authorisation to issue an enforcement notice, and it's in respect of an extension to the arcades building on the Barry Funfair site. The extension can be seen on page 56 of the report, and there are also further photographs provided on 57 and 58. 57, the top photograph shows the extension within the site. The bottom photograph shows the site before the extension had been erected, and then 58, the photograph shows the extension alongside the existing building. This authorisation is being sought in view of the appearance of the extension, it being considered harmful to the context of the site, which of course is in the Barry Island Conservation Area, and it also follows an enforcement notice that was issued by Building Control and Building Control legislation with regard to the structure, the structural stability of the building, and the matters that are obviously controlled under the building legislation. The report seeks authorisation for the removal of the building in its entirety, and then making good the remaining elevation of the remaining building.
Thank you very much. Does any member have any comment they wish to make? Councillor Hodges.
Thank you, Chairman. I was surprised when this first came up as an enforcement action. Whilst I'm of course aware of the immediate area being part of the Barry Marine Conservation Area, something I had a part in many years ago, I think we must look at the Funfair site in its historical context. Set up in 1920, with some facilities actually predating that, this area has been used for seaside leisure activities for a long, long time. I believe that the determination of the new and revamped amusement area is a natural progression for the Funfair site, and as a view of its appearance is highly subjective, and I would argue that it is an improvement to the original and run-down over 30-year-old predecessor. The comments about shuttering are interesting in the context of our own town centre. Many shutters have been put up on grant money that give our own town centre a run-down and shut-down look. I also would like to bring your attention to our own parking hut that looks particularly run down with shutters, gratings and everything on it when it is out of use. I personally would applaud the changes and improvements to the Funfair site. The obvious investment is still in its early days and have helped promote Barry Island as a family-friendly venue of choice for thousands of new and returning visitors. Within the historical context of the site, the wall is over 20 years old and was built in an imaginative way and not to a good standard. The opening up of the park, I would suggest, is not only good for extra emergency exits, but also helps more visitors to the Funfair. It points them and directs them to the non-Funfair facilities on the island. I am also struck by the reticence of the council to move against the mess and squalor behind the now shut Dolphin pub. This is an inconsistent action, in my opinion. I would have hoped that our council would have sought to work with and support the positive changes to the fun fair. Therefore, I think the first time ever in all my years on planning, I will be opposing this enforcement action, and I so move.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other members wish to speak? Margaret.
Can I just ask, have you been working with the people on Barry Island, and are they coming to you with genuine remarks to turn this round?
We have tried over a number of years, well, actually a number of years. Early 2016 we started, when this was first starting to appear. The owner has always argued it didn't need planning permission or building regulations permission, but as it was erected at the time, it became very clear it did require both. It's a permanent structure affixed to the ground where the public are able to walk through. Colleagues in building control have become extremely concerned about what has been constructed and the stability of what's been constructed, and I understand it could never meet building regulations in its current form. Planning colleagues remain concerned about a number of issues around the park, but we do hope to try and work with the park owner to try and resolve those issues, including this particular issue itself as well. Very recently the owner has engaged with us again following knowledge of this report coming to the committee, and we will be meeting with him, I hope, to try and resolve this issue without the need for formal issuing of the enforcement notice. But obviously it is very useful to us as a council to have authorisation to do so should there be an unwillingness going forward to try and resolve the matter. Clearly as a council we do have to have concerns about possible injury to people who are going in and out of the site, and the condition of the site inside. You'll see the photo on page 57, which shows a very poor condition just behind the front facade. And indeed, if you look at the photo on the front of the Barrion District today, you will notice that hasn't changed a great deal. It's actually in the background of the photo of the fairground operator. So things like that do need to be resolved. We are working with the operator to try and resolve them. We do hope we don't have to serve an enforcement notice, but without that notice in place, authorisation to serve that notice in place, it does weaken our hand somewhat.
I had Councillor Parker before you, but before I give the floor over to Councillor Parker, can I ask all members and people in the public gallery, please turn off all sound related to your mobile phones. It's very distracting, whatever's beeping and ringing. Councillor Parker, then Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair. Picking up on the public safety, and particularly in light of the very unfortunate events in London, I feel, although it might not be fully planning, we are doing it on the grounds of public safety. This structure has clearly not been inspected or monitored by anybody, in my view, of reasonable competence from a structural engineer. And it could be that, particularly with the high winds that we've had of late, that we should keep monitoring in case we actually need to seal that part off from the public with Harris fencing or something. So I'd welcome Marcus's view on that as an additional item to the recommendation.
Did you want to come back on that before Councillor Wilkinson? Yeah.
The issues you've raised, Councillor, are dealt with through building control, and you will have heard Justina mention that actually a notice has been served under building control to deal with the issues of structural condition and the failure to comply with the building regulations. The fairground operator has actually appointed an engineer now to resolve this matter. There wasn't one previously, so we are hopeful that through building control that issue will be resolved. But clearly the planning side of the argument is also necessary to look at because of the poor condition of what's been erected too.
Councillor Wilkinson.
Similar vein, I was thinking of health and safety, but if people need planning permission, they need planning permission. I'm sorry. I cannot. If someone else came here and they'd gone without planning permission, we'd be really saying sorry, and if it needs planning permission, it needs planning permission.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bird.
Chair, I move officer's recommendation because I don't think we've had a seconder for Nick's proposal.
Okay, we have a for and a second on that. Can I have a vote on the recommendation to go with officer recommendation? Dr. Johnson. Councillor Johnson. Okay. First motion. My apologies, Councillor. The first motion was to reject this recommendation of action and to go back and talk with the operator. Am I correct in characterising that in that way? Can I have all those in favour of that motion, please? All those against? Any abstentions? Okay, that motion falls. And moving on to the motion in favour of officer recommendation, which is the removal of the unauthorised arcade building extension, including the frame, the foundations and all associated materials from the land in their entirety, and restore the land and perimeter wall to their former condition prior to the commencement of the unauthorised works, and that in the event of non-compliance with the notice, authorisation is also sought to take such legal proceedings as may be required. All those in favour, please? And all those against? Any abstentions? That motion passes. Thank you. That's fine. Moving on to agenda item 10.2. This is another enforcement action agenda item related to land and buildings at Cogmore's on Cardiff Road, Dinas Palace.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'll pass over to Justina again to deal with this matter.
Again, this is authorisation being sought to issue an enforcement notice. It's in respect of land that's just off Cardiff Road between Barry, the McDonald's roundabout, and Dinas Palace. The site is subject of some recent development in that a green horse stables has been erected on the site with planning permission. And also some engineering works have been carried out before that so that the building can be erected. The authorisation is sought in respect of a caravan that's being stored on the site, and through the enforcement investigation we've established that the caravan is not in residential use. It is simply being stored on the site, and there is no connection with that storage and the horse-related use of the site. The caravan is to the rear of the existing building on the site, but it is quite highly visible from Cardiff Road. It's there is no purpose for that caravan to be on the site as far as we've been able to establish, and as such we're seeking authorisation to require its removal, particularly in view of the utilitarian appearance of it, and it is a highly visible site. So authorisation being sought to issue an enforcement notice to simply cease the use of the land for the storage of the caravan.
Thank you very much. Councillor Penrose.
I'd like to move officer recommendations.
Have a second for that. All in favour? Moving off the recommendation. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Moving on to item, where are we at now? 11.1. This is planning application 2016-0051 FUL Aberthor North Quarry, Castle Road, Aberthor.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think we have any speakers for
this
matter, and also there are no late representations relating to this matter. Members, those of you that were with us at the last Planning Committee may recall this came before you before the break on the 30th of March, and it was deferred at that meeting for officers to consider in further issues relating to dust, and these matters have been expanded. So I'll go into that in a moment. Just to give a summary then of what the application relates to. It is essentially an application to vary conditions on a previous planning permission, which relates to the deposit of pulverised ash in Aberthor Quarry in association with the power station. The works largely involve the increasing the capacity of the the volume of ash to be deposited in the quarry, equivalent of approximately 1 million tonnes of ash, to be levelled across the site. And if I can refer members to page 76 of the officer's report, it does show there the variance in levels shown in 2 different colours. Apologies if it's slightly difficult to read, but I hope you can just about make it out. But also the report describes the variation being across the site up to a maximum of 6 metres in height overall, but no higher than 1 metre compared to the previous level at its highest point being approximately 48 metres. There are various incidental changes to the conditions overall of the permission, which are set out in the report. But if I can turn to the main issue at hand, which came out from the last planning committee meeting, was concerns about dust being generated from the existing use and planning permission, and whether or not this further extension of that will actually cause further problems. So officers have been in discussions with NRW, who are the primary person responsible for dealing with any dust issues that relate to this use through their permitting system. So our own environmental health officers advised that if we were to receive complaints in relation to this use and dust in the vicinity, that they would be referred on to NRW because they're the responsible authority for it. NRW have advised that they do regularly monitor the operations in terms of dust deposition in the area. They said that their comments at 83 and 84 of the officer's report summarises all of this, but essentially that the number of complaints had declined in recent months. The last incident that could be attributed to the quarry itself was July 2016, which was attributed to a particular incident where there was a combination of hot weather and strong winds leading to dust obviously whipping up off the quarry and being deposited locally. In response to that, the operators have put in control measures now to do with monitoring wind speeds and taking appropriate action, and those are listed in some detail on page 84 in terms of the appropriate response to high winds. So NRW are satisfied with those measures. They're not objecting to the proposal, and officers are still recommending approval of the application.
Thank you very much. Councillor Lloyd.
Thank you, Chairman. This issue is a highly contentious issue for the residents of Roos Ward. I've received a number of informal representations since I took up post about concerns over the air quality in and around the Aberthaw area and to the west of the village, ranging from nuisance dust to problems actually with health. I appreciate that the regulatory body to monitor the air quality is Natural Resources Wales, but I feel that an application on this level to extend the ability for RWE to deposit 1 million tonnes, and I think that's an important point. When you read through the application, the 6 metres, I don't think does it justice in terms of what we're talking about. We're talking about 1 million tonnes of pulverised ash within a very short distance of a large village bordering on town. So from my perspective and from the residents of Roos, we have numerous concerns, and on this basis I'd like to ask the officer some questions, if I may. Can the officer confirm whether the comments which are referred to in the report, which I believe to have happened since the deferment from the last meeting, were these comments made in writing or were they verbally given by Natural Resources Wales?
Just turn off your microphone.
Yeah, I believe they were given via email, yes.
Okay, and I think you prefaced your introduction by saying that, you know, it's the belief of the authority that the management processes and controls are sufficient. But just for the record, I'm please can you go into more detail and just confirm that, that as an authority we are comfortable that the management processes and controls are sufficient to monitor and control impact on local public health.
If you wouldn't mind turning your microphone off again, sorry, thank you.
Thank you. I mean, it fundamentally comes back to the point that it is NRW that are responsible for that through their permitting authority. So if they had those concerns, they would be raising an objection to the planning application, and it would be that we would need to consider as local planning authority. They are not. They are telling us that they're satisfied with the measures in place, and we need to accept that they know what they're talking about in that regard. Clearly, there have been issues in the past. The operator has responded to those with measures that NRW think are appropriate and that are listed here. We have done the sort of belt and braces approach of then ensuring that those details are set out by planning condition as well, so that just reinforcing that those measures are undertaken, and that really is the sort of appropriate response to this kind of application.
If I could just come back on that. I think what concerns me most about the comments from Natural Resources Wales is that there is an admission within the report that there have been issues with expulsion of dust in the area, and there have been notified events. And whilst I think it's in everyone's interest to ensure that the appropriate management controls and responses are in place to try and minimise and mitigate those potential impacts on public health, they have happened. So this isn't just it may happen. They have happened in the past. I appreciate that management controls and processes have been changed to deal with that. But one of the examples which troubles me is that the incident, or the most recent incident, was relating to a weather event. Now, the residents of Roos Ward, as much of the Vale of Glamorgan, we love our wild and varied weather, but we're also aware that weather conditions can change at the drop of a hat. So for a management process and control to be so able to be varied by the weather concerns me. I appreciate this is probably something we're going to have to deal with Natural Resources Wales after this event, as this is only an amendment to an existing planning application. But on that basis, I feel that I have to represent properly the residents of Roos, and I would move to refuse this application.
Councillor Hodges.
Thank you, Chairman. My question is really that this is obviously a further 1 million tonnes of pulverised ash. If this application is successful, is it possible or envisaged that there will be a further application in the future, so soon after the original one a couple of years ago and now this one now, to further expand and heighten the site? And in fact, is that possible?
Any application is possible. We have had meetings with the applicants. They have not advised of that. They have advised that this is what's necessary in this particular case. I can't really comment any further than that.
I second refusal.
Before any other members wish to comment, Councillor Johnson.
As somebody who's new to this committee and new to this location, it said that the last occasion on which dust was a problem was in summer 2016, which is all of last year. I'm just for clarification wondering on how many, if we know on how many occasions dust has been found on the receptors from as a result from this site, and since when? Just because there's a number of different dates of planning permissions thrown in here, and the applications to varied conditions of planning permission 2013 00903 FUL, which is obviously 4 years ago. So I'm just wondering, sort of on how many occasions dust have been found as an issue within the space of the 4 years since this was put down as a planning permission.
Thank you.
Accepted.
Thanks.
we don't have that information. What we do have is on page 83, which makes it clear that dust issues are cannot clearly be targeted on one single use at all times, because there are a number of dust generators in that area. What we have is that the last time the NRW was able to specifically identify this user was July 2016, and that it was dealt with and investigated at that time. NRW, what I would add there, though, is that if NRW had a concern that this was constantly being breached, they would have taken their own action, but no doubt they would have advised us of that fact too. They haven't advised us of that fact, and they have raised no objection in that regard. So,
Councillor Johnson?
Just clarification, because it also says elsewhere in here that NRW undertakes site assessments twice a year, and this is essentially 2 assessments ago, unless a specific complaint is raised. But if we have 1 million tonnes extra as part of this, then we consider that position could be worsened. And that, I think, is the fear that I'm sure people have.
All I'd say is clearly that the deposit of ash is happening now. It's ongoing. It's not. This isn't something that's just happening now because they've applied for planning permission. They've applied to be able to continue to deposit the ash. So that's happening now. We are not aware of any further any issues beyond that one. But you are quite right to say that they continue to monitor this site, and they would react to complaints if they are received. And indeed, if you look, I think at bottom of page 84, if we as a council receive issues relating to dust, we will pass those issues straight on to NRW ourselves as well, because obviously, for the public's point of view, they probably see the council. They wouldn't necessarily know it was Natural Resources Wales they had to complain to, so they may see it's the council. So we would forward, our environmental health colleagues would forward that on to Natural Resources Wales too.
Councillor Bird.
Thank you. Do we as a council have any right to ask NRW to increase the frequency from twice yearly?
Unfortunately, that's a matter for them. It's their licensing procedure. And I think I'm right in saying on this, and I would have to say this is only my opinion. But I think I am right. They no longer consult us on this type of renewal license, because they're aware that there's a planning permission in place. So they deal with it themselves. We used to be invited to meetings with NRW, or Environment Agency as it was, but we are no longer invited to those meetings.
If there are no other comments from members, Councillor Lloyd, before we can consider your motion for refusal, we'd need a reason under planning law to attach to that refusal. So I wonder if you would like to describe which area you think we should be assessing that application.
Apologies, new to this. I think my basis, if it is a basis, is on the uncertainty of impact on public health. I don't know if that is an acceptable reason for this application, but that's the basis of my concern.
The difficulty there would be that the area which we're concerned about is governed by another body, not ourselves. So we are interfering in powers which aren't ours. Because we have no objection and they have raised no concerns, clearly we would, as an authority, if we were to be questioning those concerns, we would have to have our own evidence commissioned to, for example, challenge that. Otherwise, the concern would be that the refusal would not stand up at appeal and could open the council up to costs in the future if it were not to stand up. So to make an argument around the type of technical issues you suggested would mean we would have to have our own evidence that suggested there was an issue. And at the moment, while there may be some anecdotal evidence, the body that deals with it, if you like, the legislative body that deals with it, has no objection, and that's the difficulty in making a refusal around that grounds. for example, if a reason for refusal were to be about the character and appearance of raising the mound by 6 metres and the impact that would have, that is something we as the planning authority look at and consider and have control over. If we were concerned that we didn't have enough information to make the decision around the impact of the raising of the level, specifically with regard to its appearance or its character or its impact in terms of loss of light or effect on the character of the countryside, effect on the character of the area, that's something we can consider and we could deal with and we could legitimately challenge. The issue specifically around dust is difficult for us because it is a very technical issue which is governed by another licensing authority. The only area where I think we could possibly make some sort of, there could be a debatable argument, is if it was a loss of amenity through the operation itself in general terms without specifically referring to dust or that activity. But I would also point out that again we have no objection from the relevant bodies in that regard, and it would be anecdotal, and I have to say, if I was advising you as your professional advisor, I suggest it would not stand up at appeal. Does that help? Sorry.
Councillor Lloyd, do you still wish to move your motion to refuse? And if so, which grounds do you think?
I think on the basis of legal advice, I'll have to withdraw that.
Councillor Bird.
I'll move the officer's recommendations, Chair.
Second by Councillor Parker.
And I'd like to make a point as well, because you're going to ask me for grounds.
Okay.
Yeah. My grounds would be on the impacts of residential amenity, also the uncertainty over
Sorry, Councillor Hodges, I've received the motion to accept. Before that, I need to consider that.
Well, I had
motion.
moved one, and
you seconded a motion that was then withdrawn.
A withdrawal by the mover, and gave me no chance to continue with my opposition. No. And I haven't. Yeah. I would like to make my objections on the grounds of impacts on residential amenity and also future uncertainty over the future expansion of the site. I'd also like to make a point about I am constantly dismayed by this council handing over responsibility at every opportunity for the caring for its environment and also the health and safety of its residents. And I will oppose this and every other scheme that affects the environmental conditions for our residents.
So moving on, the motion Councillor Hodges has put forward. Can I see all those in favour of that motion, please? And all those against? And any abstentions? Thank you very much. So moving now on to the motion put forward by Councillor Bird in respect of officer recommendation to approve the application with regard to the policies listed in the report. Can I see all those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions? Planning recommendation is approved. Marcus.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to come in really quickly on one point that Councillor Hodges made there, and obviously all members have been to the training, which is really helpful. Please be aware this is a planning committee, and while I'm sure we all echo Councillor Hodges' sentiment about the Vale's environment and everything that goes with it, as a planning authority you are only entitled to deal with issues that are before you which relate to planning. So, for example, it is not an abdication of responsibility to refer issues relating to natural resources Wales, which were in their governance, to them. It is a matter that we have no powers over them. So please don't feel that is an abdication of this council's responsibility. We, as a planning authority, have no powers in that regard.
I do appreciate that. It just beggars belief in my mind why we employ environmental health and pollution control officers.
If I can move on to the next item on the agenda, please. This is to consider planning application 2016 00946/FUL Unit 6 T Vernon Industrial Estate in Barry. It's page number 107 in your packets. If I hand to Marcus, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes. Just to point out, we do have a late representation on this, which is a further letter of support from a local resident. Just to quickly move through it, obviously members will be aware this was the subject of a site visit today. I'll really quickly go through the executive summary. It is an application to construct a retail store and 90 parking spaces on the site of an existing business unit in T Vernon Industrial Estate. Clearly, it is a site that's an identified business site, commercial site within both the unitary development plan and the local development plan. The current occupiers of the site are the COS Group, who employ approximately 32 people. The applicant obviously has indicated they will be employing up to 40 people. The application itself is for a building of 1,660 square metres gross, providing 1,140 square metres of retail space and parking for 91 cars. The store itself will be approximately 59 metres at its maximum width and 33 metres at maximum depth and a height of 5.3 metres, and the plans can be seen on page 109 and 110. Your officers have prepared this report, and obviously we've been through this once in terms of before the site visit was heard, but clearly the issues that are at play here are that the application site is an identified commercial industrial site. It is a site that is not promoted for retail uses. We are concerned about the loss of this site and consequently have recommended refusal on that grounds. We are also concerned about the impact that this development will have on the existing retail centres mainly in Barry. The information that has been submitted with the application makes it clear there will be an impact on existing retail centres, and that it could be harmful to Barry, or will be harmful to Barry. That would be contrary in many respects to national policy, Welsh Government policy, and our own local policies, and that is set out on various pages 117 to 120 of the report. I understand at the site visitor there were also some concerns about access and highway safety. While you will be aware that our highways colleagues aren't here and haven't raised objections, I am myself concerned about the possible issues relating to sustainability in regard of accessing bus services when travelling back towards Barry, because you will have to cross what is essentially a dual carriageway to get there, which does obviously discourage people from using public transport and will mean that in the main it will be used by people who have cars and will be parking in that location. One other point which I just missed and I just realised I should have made, the report doesn't actually points out that there were comments from Councillor Ann Moore, but that we also received comments from Councillor Neil Moore, who supported the application, but suggested there be further discussions with the current operators to find out if there were an alternative location they could find. I think it's worth pointing out at this time the operators have contacted the council, the current occupiers of the site have contacted the council about alternative sites since the deferral of the last application, or this application. That contact has been made with our colleagues in economic development. However, it is very difficult to find a site in the Barry area which provides a similar site with a similar building in situ for an operator of the same ilk. So it would be extremely difficult to find a replacement building in situ for this site, for this current operator on the site. I think that's a very valid point to make, because during the course of the report, and it points out that the applicant tries to make the point there is sufficient capacity in the area for in uses of this kind, and this can be lost without any great impact on that. But I have to add that that we feel is not the case, certainly in regard of Barry and its environs, and there are no similar sites suitable for the use that currently goes on there that we can think of as a council.
Thank you very much. At this time, we'll move to the public speakers. We have two in favour. Thank you very much to our public speakers for joining us this afternoon, Mr. Rob Jones and Mr. David Emery. Is it your intention to just make two separate 3-minute statements, or are you sharing a double act? Two separate. Mr. Rob Jones first, then, please. I will give you a time up and stop you at just after 3 minutes. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to address you this afternoon. My name is Rob Jones and I'm the Regional Property Director for Aldi Stores Limited, responsible for our new stores in South Wales. I would like to take this opportunity to respectfully urge members to take account of the considerable benefits that this application proposal can deliver to Barry, and as such overturn the refusal recommendation of your planning officer. At Aldi, we are committed to ensuring that communities across the country have access to high quality food at affordable prices, and our track record and success demonstrates that customers, the length and breadth of the country, appreciate this. Unlike other large retailers, Aldi has a unique offer and does not act as a one-stop shop. Our stores do not have a butcher, fishmonger or baker, nor do they sell tobacco. Stores therefore encourage linked trips to other local shops, and the same would be true in Barry. This means that many local residents who currently travel outside of the area to complete their shopping would stay in Barry, and that expenditure would be retained in the town. Aldi is disappointed with the officer recommendation and strongly refutes the two grounds for recommending refusal. Supported by extensive wider evidence, Aldi disagrees with the officer's narrow interpretation that our proposal will result in a loss of an employment site. If approved, the new store will create approximately 40 new jobs for local people, employed at an industry-leading rate of £8.53 per hour, above the national living wage, on a minimum of 25 hours per week. In a moment, you will hear from a local employer, Cos Group, who wish to expand their successful commercial operation in Barry using the capital receipt from the sale of this site, which will safeguard and create additional employment within the town. The proposal before you will therefore result in a net increase of employment in Barry. Aldi also disagrees with a second reason for refusal, which suggests that there is no capacity for additional convenience goods floor space in Barry. It is our informed view that the Council's analysis is based on a fundamentally flawed interpretation of the authority's now outdated retail study. Additionally, this proposal will regenerate a brownfield site, providing a clean, managed and well-landscaped site at a gateway location to the town. It should be noted that the Council's own Ecology Officer and Natural Resources Wales have not raised any objection to the proposed removal of trees at the Cardiff Road boundary. However, Aldi remain happy to accept a condition to deliver an appropriate scheme of landscaping at the site, including the planting of additional trees. Similarly, the Council's Highways Officer has also raised no objection to the proposal cited and has cited the existing access as acceptable. Further to this, should permission be granted by you this afternoon, Aldi has also agreed that a financial contribution of just over £26,000 will be made towards enhancing sustainable transport in Barry. Finally, I'd like to draw your attention to the significant support from residents in the Barry community for a new food store at the application site, a number of whom have come along in person tonight. Aldi believes that this demonstrates significant economic demand and a specific need for a new food store in the area. Approximately 94 residents have submitted...
That's your time. Thank you very much. Thank you. And we didn't quite start the clock in time as well. Thank you, Mr. Jones. Moving on to... before I move on to the second speaker, any points of clarification from members? Councillor Burnett.
Could I just clarify from a point you made? So you don't intend selling fish, bread or meat at the store?
No, to clarify, Aldi sells pre-packed bread and pre-packed fish, but we don't have a fresh counter, which we describe as a butcher or a fishmonger's or a bakery. So we don't bake product on site. It's pre-packaged product that's delivered. So in effect, it is not competing with a fresh bakery or a fresh fishmonger or a fresh butcher's counter. Is that clear?
Thank you. Any other points of clarification? Okay, thank you, Mr. Jones. Our second speaker, again, for the application, Mr. David Emery. Your 3 minutes will start when you start talking. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair and Councillors, for giving me the opportunity to speak in support of this planning application. My name is David Emery. I'm the Managing Director of the COS Group, who are the existing occupiers of 6 T-Ville on Industrial Estate. On behalf of the 32 employees of the COS Group, I would respectfully ask that the committee overturn the refusal recommendation and approve the planning consent for Aldi to demolish the existing building and build a new store. This would enable the COS Group to find or preferably build alternative larger premises within Barry that would be more fit for our purposes. The COS Group has traded from Barry for an unbroken period of almost 50 years, and I can assure everybody that we have no intention of leaving the town. The majority of our loyal workforce are resident in Barry, and we are acutely aware as employers that our employees are the lifeblood of our business. Our current premises is a tired, unattractive ex-WDA unit that requires significant cost to update, which at the present time is unaffordable. The footprint of the unit has led to unprofitable working conditions, and together with the lack of a showroom facility to showcase our commercial interiors offering, this has inhibited the recent growth of our company. COS does not own our present building. It is owned by the COS Directors Pension Fund. It is the intention of the trustees to use the capital generated from the sale to Aldi to invest in improved commercial premises, more appropriate for productivity and expansion. Our business plan envisages that COS will generate a further 10 jobs in the short term. I hope that you will understand and appreciate that we have until now been unable to be proactive in our search for a new site or existing building, given the uncertainty and delays generated by the planning process. It has not been commercially suitable for COS to identify sites in advance of being issued planning permission, as this would crucially weaken our negotiation stance. We have, however, agreed an extension period with Aldi in respect of COS being able to remain at T-Ville on for 12 months rather than the initial 6 months. This has been advised to Mr. Morgan Howell, and it would be our intention to meet with him at his earliest opportunity to seek his advice and directions regarding sites within Barry that would suit our purposes. Chair and Councillors, I would summarise the benefits of the application before you as the following. COS have a once-in-a-lifetime commercial opportunity to further invest in Barry if you agree to support Aldi's application. A positive decision will help to secure 32 COS Group jobs and create a further 10 posts in Barry. Barry has an opportunity to welcome an international company whose development of a prestigious store and associated landscaping will greatly enhance Barry's southern gateway. Approximately 40 local people will be afforded the opportunity to enjoy the benefits of meaningful employment at the new Aldi store, which is in addition to the posts that we wish to create as an existing local employer. The whole population of Barry and its surrounding conurbation will have the opportunity to potentially reduce their weekly household costs, this at a time of austerity and uncertainty. Thank you very much for listening to me this afternoon. I sincerely hope that your elected voice will overturn the refusal recommendation by balancing the overwhelming positives that an acceptance will bring to the COS Group and our town. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Emery. Have we got any points of clarification from members? Councillor Burnett.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Emery, for coming along tonight. I suppose I have a concern when we heard earlier that there is concern over the availability of suitable property, and also that at the moment you haven't felt it the appropriate way forward to actually look to locate somewhere in advance. What happens, could you clarify for us, what happens if planning permission is awarded tonight and you can't find anywhere and you've only got 12 months?
We haven't been able to look for sites. We've kept our eye on sites that have become available during the 3-year process that this has been involved, and those have come and gone. We would have certainly taken other sites which have been available in the time. In the event of us not being able to identify a site to either build on within the 12-month period or purchase within the 12-month period, we would look to rent one or two sites on a short-term lease to give ourselves the opportunity to identify an unused brownfield site without an existing building on it that we would then apply for planning consent and build. We don't have to have our offices and our warehouses in exactly the same location, which is one of the restraints on the number of buildings suited to our purposes at the moment. If we had to operate for a short-term lease, an office in one location in Barry and a warehouse in another location in Barry, that would be achievable for us. It would be our long-term goal or a medium-term goal to identify a suitable site and either alter it so that it is suitable for our purposes and it has the required amount of space for office and warehouse, or alternatively build one from scratch.
Thank you, Mr. Emery. Any other points of clarification? Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. Just by way of clarification, it appears to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you have 12 months in which, if this application was approved as opposed to not, to find new premises and build on it. Well, obviously we all realise that it would be quite impossible to achieve planning permission and build something within 12 months. Clarify to me exactly what your intentions are with regard a new build.
I agree that 12 months would be extremely tight and probably unachievable. If we felt that a new build was the solution to our commercial and operational needs, then we would be prepared to wait for that process to take place. We would hope that the council would support us as a employer in Barry of almost 50 years, to be 50 years next year, and as a long-standing employer in the town, we would hope that the council would help us achieve that new build in the shortest possible time. It could be that we're not required to build something. We could actually take on an existing site with an existing building which would require a planning application to alter and extend. I would hope that process might be shorter than a new build, but again, you can correct me if I'm wrong in that. If either of those two processes required longer than 12 months, we would identify a site or sites within the town that we could rent or lease in for a shorter period while we were achieving our long-term goal, which is a fit-for-purpose, purpose-built or purpose-altered building for our needs.
Thank you. Are there any other points of clarification from members? Councillor Hodges.
Thank you. Have you considered a redundant church in Barry? After all, I'm sure you could get permission to convert that and have no need for any sort of parking controls. Have you considered that?
We're not aware of that site. We have spoken to the economic development team to help ask them for their help in identifying suitable sites. We've met with the planning officer, Mr. Howell, and again expressed our interest in help in identifying suitable sites. There's a lot of brownfield in Barry which isn't currently occupied, and we feel that within a reasonable distance of where we're currently located, we should be able to identify something that's suited to our needs. If that's converting a church, then if that had the square meterage that we need with the elevation that we need and could provide the amount of office space that we need, then obviously we would consider it.
Thank you, Councillor Hodges. I have one final clarification question, if I may. In terms of, you mentioned wanting to relocate within Barry, within a short distance of Barry, what would be a deal breaker with regard, what's your high water mark for acceptance on new locations?
Our intention is to stay in Barry. We've always been located in Barry, and a very high proportion of our staff are from the town. We're mindful that if we were to have to move out of Barry, their costs for travelling to work would increase probably unsustainably. Also, our customer base is fundamentally in Cardiff and the Vale, so we would ideally like to be as close as we currently are to our customer base, or within only a short additional travel time. So my feeling is that within the environs of Barry there wouldn't be anywhere that would be a deal breaker, because transport as it currently is in and out of our existing site to Cardiff, to the M4, to the rest of the Vale is probably no better or worse than anywhere else within Barry.
Councillor Jones, this is a point of clarification, or should we move on to debating the motion?
I would ask us to move on because I don't see what we're gaining by cross-examining a business owner rather than discussing a planning application.
I was about to move us on anyway because I'd accepted there were no more points of clarification. Thank you, Mr. Emery. Yes, Mr. Emery. Any members wishing to speak on this application? Further to the clarifications we've already sought from the owners. Councillor Wilkinson.
I'm in a dilemma, really. I'm concerned more about the traffic concern for me, because I live not far from Lidl's, and I know lots of people go there on transport who's got families, and they're carrying their children and they're shopping. Now, if they come out of Aldi's, what worries me is them crossing that road. And there is going to be families go there, because it's the type of shop the families go. They're going to be with a pushchair on shopping, and they got to get across that main road. And that is what's worrying me more than anything. There is a bus shelter this side. They can get off. That's fine. But it's going into Cardiff. But if they want to go back into Barry, they have to cross that very dangerous main road. And that is what's worrying me more than anything. And I just can't get my head around it at the moment. I need something to happen.
Thank you, Councillor Wilkinson. Councillor Johnson was next. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I represent and live in Barry Town Centre, and I'm always concerned at anything that may have a negative impact upon the economic climate there. However, I also recognise that Barry is itself ringed by supermarkets, several of which are in the eastern side of town. I'm a little concerned by some of the comments I've already heard tonight. I think we've had suggested that there are two reasons for refusal made here, one of which is the loss of the existing employment sites, and the other is the sequential test, essentially with regards to the location of the supermarket. I think I've already answered a lot of the queries about the sequential test by pointing out that there are supermarkets of all size and nature around the outskirts of Barry. So I don't see that the argument that this is anything other than, from that perspective, I don't think that there's anything there that really can be said or done differently. We already have we have the Waitrose, we have two on the waterfront, we have one in the north of town, we have one in the west of town. These all impact upon the town centre in one form or another, and it's a shame, but I don't think that this breaches that sequential test in any particular way, more than other things that have been given a planning application here. I'm concerned about some of the comments I've heard about the loss of employment space, because that perhaps is sort of major issue. But I'm not sure what it says for our development planning system if we're turning around and saying that we don't have a location that an organisation that employs 30 or 40 people can move to at fairly short notice. This is Wales's largest town. We have examples previously of consumer-led developments in the area. It's not just an industrial site. McDonald's was given planning permission there at the corner in the 1990s. New Broad Street Motors was given planning permission there earlier this decade. I assume the highways issues that anybody has relating to people wanting to go back to Barry from a trip to a supermarket, whatever supermarket that might be at this site, equally applies for anybody going to pick up a McDonald's there, and includes the staff there as well. So I would like a bit of clarification, if it's available for anybody, as to how we deal with the fact that people presumably also visit the McDonald's site there by public transport, or look to get home from there by public transport, because surely that would be the same. There are other issues further on, such as the Londis petrol station further up the road. This seems to me a little bit control economy that we're trying to dictate who is using that site in particular. I'm concerned, to be honest, as I've said in brief, about what effectively seems to be a cross-examining of a long-term Barry company. What sort of faith are we showing in COS as a business that's based in Barry for half a century, if we're sitting there trying to undermine them in a planning committee? On that basis, I would like us to consider accepting this application. I would much rather that the Section 106 went to improving our town centres rather than sustainable transport. However, if that sustainable transport did mean that we could reduce any issues regarding the highway and regarding pedestrian safety in the area, then that would also be an appropriate use, albeit one that would benefit the company paying for it rather than benefiting the centre of town. Thank you.
I've had a number of people already put up to speak next. Do you have anything to say in reply?
Just quickly on those points. Obviously, can I point members to the retail impact assessment part of the report, page 128. Councillor Johnson did talk about the fact that there is existing retail operators ringing the town, and indeed in the town centre, and close to the town centre. Basically, there is an approach that the authority takes when it looks at new developments like this. The report does set out how that approach is undertaken, but essentially we look at the cumulative impact of all of these retail operators and how that cumulative impact affects the existing capacity of the town centre to absorb it, essentially. You'll see in here that the report that was submitted by the applicants themselves shows that there will be a percentage negative impact on various elements of the town centre. Barry Town Centre down 4.4%, Main Street down 5.7%. That has to be read in conjunction with some of the retail work that we have done as part of the local development plan, which identifies capacity within Barry itself to absorb a shop like this. And that is where there is an element of dispute between ourselves and the applicants. And we actually refer to a survey that was undertaken on our behalf in 2013. The applicants have tried to extrapolate some information from that survey and apply their own figures to that. And basically you come out with two sets of different figures. Our figures show that they would that there isn't capacity for the Aldi store. Aldi, by using some changes to the figures, have said that there is capacity. However, I think it's worth noting that the LDP data was subject to an inquiry recently. The inspector looked at that with some great detail and took the view that the plan was sound and that the information is sound. And we would argue that you know, you're never going to have a line in the sand in this. For Aldi to say, oh, your data's out of date, it's 2013, is really quite unreasonable. They haven't run the whole set of data figures through. The report sets that out clearly. It sets out that we still feel that there will be a negative impact on the town centre and that there isn't the capacity there, and by virtue of there not being the capacity there, there will be loss of retail trade in Barry Town Centre. So this additional store doesn't take account either of the fact that there are existing consents for retail. We'll call them out-of-town retail. They are in the waterfront, but there are existing consents there which haven't been implemented yet, and we can't take away. So those sites are there as well, and then this gets added to it. So that's how the capacity figure essentially is reached. You also made the point about the fact that there is a McDonald's there and indeed a car showroom. I think it's important to note with the car showroom that is not necessarily a non-conforming use in a commercial area, albeit it is generally a sui generis use, is what we call it, which is a use in its own regard, in its own use class. You'll be aware that in Cardiff and in other areas you often find car showrooms close to other commercial areas. It does tend to happen. Bessemer Road is a good example, yeah. The other point is that the McDonald's, which was obviously granted consent on the corner, is a relatively small development. The issue of crossing the road and the issue which was raised by Councillor Wilkinson is an important point, because obviously you will have a high volume of people attending this premises. To actually put a crossing in, I think it's worth noting how much it would cost, because obviously the offer here is £27,000 for sustainable transport. To put a crossing across the dual carriageway in that location would probably cost between £200,000 and £250,000. So it is extremely expensive to put a lit crossing. You will recall, some of you will recall, who were on a previous committee meeting, we had a similar debate about a housing development, small housing development at Pentramairi, and indeed it would have killed that development dead if they would have had to have put a crossing across the A48 at that point. So it is important to note that a crossing, firstly, we do not know if that crossing can be achieved. No work has been done on it if it was to be provided. And secondly, we know it would be extremely expensive to provide.
Councillor Johnson, if it's brief, I've got 3 other speakers as well. Thank you.
Just very quickly, I just wanted to point out that the transport is not given as one of the 2 reasons for recommendation to refuse. And also, I just want to repeat this point that we've given multiple permissions to multiple supermarkets, but this is apparently the one that breaks the camel's back. I'm just a little bit concerned as to how we reached that, essentially that position.
Councillor Bird,
Sorry, Chair, can I just come back
Okay.
on that? I just want to respond to those points because most of those supermarkets are decades old and operate in a completely different planning policy framework that we are now considering this application under. You know, Tesco's probably dates back to the 80s, I should think. Similarly, the Waitrose store was a replacement supermarket. Appreciate that Lidl's is probably the newest of the supermarkets that aren't on the waterfront ones technically comply with planning policy because they are edge of centre. They help to maintain pedestrian footfall to and from the town centre. There's linked trips. This is an out of centre retail unit. That's why it doesn't fit within the retail hierarchy in our development plans. That's why it's contrary to national and local retail planning policy, because the whole premise is that there's not really going to be link trips. It's nowhere near any other local shopping centres. It's not part of the town centre or edge of centre. And the other point I wanted to just quickly draw your attention to on page 127, the report does deal with the planning permissions granted at Broad Street Motors and McDonald's restaurants, which you know, does set out that it was, again, a different framework in which those decisions were made, where those sites had been vacant, they'd been marketed for appropriate employment uses, and those hadn't come forward. It's a very different situation to an active site that's currently in use by, you know, an employer that we've heard today has been a successful employer for 50 years in Barry. They are different planning policy frameworks, and we just need to be mindful of that.
Councillor Bird.
Thank you, Chair. Whilst I would absolutely love to see an Aldi come to Barry, I feel this is not the right place. Tivurlon is our probably premier industrial site in the Vale of Glamorgan. It is a very well populated, well used and high quality industrial estate. It is the policy has just been ratified that is to remain as an industrial area in our new LDP, and this is going totally against policy to put retail right on the edge of it. I think it would clog up the main artery into the estate with the amount of traffic that a supermarket generates. I think we need to bear in mind that we're all fixated on Aldi. We shouldn't be talking about which company is buying this. We are looking at a permission for a supermarket, and it not necessarily maybe Aldi. COS could turn around tomorrow once they've got the planning permission and renegotiate with Tesco. We can't do anything about who goes there. It's in the wrong place. While I welcome Aldi wanting to come to Barry, I'm sure there are better sites in Barry that are more sustainable, that people can walk to and get public transport to, not have to jump in the car. And I believe that we would be ruining our premier industrial site. The site that COS are on is perfectly able to be expanded. You could put another warehouse on there equally as big and extend the car park still within the current site. So I am going to move the officer's recommendation.
Seconded by Councillor Parker. I have 2 more people to speak as well. I'm going to take those comments before we move to that motion. Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair. I have struggled with this application for some time, as probably any one of us around who was at the previous planning committee did. I am stunned that the Highways Department don't seem to express any concerns, because I certainly have concerns about traffic and pedestrians, because they don't mix, and I just think I'm astounded that there's no comment whatsoever, and certainly no concern but from them. Well, I'm concerned, but I suppose that's because the recommendation is to reject, so maybe they didn't feel they needed to endorse that. But what I come back to is this issue about employment sites, and I was comforted by what the Managing Director of COS told us, that their desire to relocate to another employment site in and around Barry. And I understand the commercial reasons why that may not have been something he could do openly until he knows the way forward. But I am concerned that there aren't that many places, and T Verlon is indeed an employment site. And if we allow this to become a retail park, which is, dare I say, what this opens the door to, we may see the end of an employment site. And it's on the grounds that it is an employment site that I find myself agreeing with Councillor Bird. I would very much welcome Aldi. I would very much welcome a deal between Aldi and COS. But unfortunately, I can't reconcile what it will do to this site. So at the moment, I am minded to support the officer recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor King. Councillor Burnett. For the online viewers, if you could, thank you.
A lot of what I want to say has been said, but slightly differently. It is this issue. I mean, I'm a strong supporter of Aldi. I have no doubt that we will not only have one, but numerous Aldis in the town in future years. I'm still not completely convinced on which way I'm going to vote, but I am really concerned about the precedent that could be set here in terms of the long-term impact on a valuable employment site. Do we really want to create a Culverhouse Cross shopping centre at that point? And I'd like clarification from the officer, would the precedent actually have an impact on that site? The Vales, or Vale stroke Barry's done very well in the BSc is full with small and start-up businesses. There's a BSc 2 coming online shortly for small and start-up businesses. A lot of those units are already reserved. The Vale Enterprise Centre has got high levels of occupancy. They're all at the small level of business. Where do we have for businesses to go? My huge concern is that we will damage the ability of small local businesses to grow if we damage an employment site. And the other one is for anybody that was on that site visit this morning, was getting in and out of that location. The highways officer discussion is actually discussing just the side road. It's talking about Sully View rather than the main road, and to have to get into the right-hand lane from that site and then go round the roundabout to get back to Barry, which is where the main population would be coming. And actually, if you're coming from outside Barry in there and having to turn across 2 lanes of traffic going at 40 mile an hour, we're talking about 90 parking spaces. You could be talking 50, 60 extra cars an hour, making that sort of negotiating that road layout. I have got concerns about that, but for me, I think the deciding factor is going to be the precedent and the potential damage to a valuable employment site.
Thank you, Councillor Burnett. Councillor Hodges.
Just a simple question, really. We're talking about the T Verlon site and its future if we allowed a retailer onto the site. Can I ask what the status of the biology business in T Verlon is?
Marcus.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I'll try and deal with both of those in the same response. In terms of precedent, this is either the largest or one of the largest sites there. If this were to be lost, I think we would, as a council, would find it very difficult to argue any future losses to retail specific uses. It clearly would remain an employment site within the LDP and the unitary development plan, but that would be significantly weakened by virtue of a pure residential use being allowed, retail use, sorry, not residential, pure retail use being allowed where there had been no evidence of any marketing that showed that there was no need for the site, as Vicky referred to in the previous comments from the report. So it would fly in the face of policy, and I think if in future that would be taken into account. In respect of other units on the site, and I think Councillor Hodges referred to biology, that is actually not the only use there which has a trade counter. Now, this is where the planning system becomes very complicated and difficult. Biology have had an enforcement notice served on them and upheld, which requires them not to be an A1 use, not to be a retail use. However, they operate, or were operating, a system where they were allowing people in with a trade card and allowing to buy with a trade card, as does, I think, Screwfix, which is on the same site. That is deemed to be what's known as a B1 use in the planning system, which is light industrial and commercial. It's therefore not a retail use. So I think it's important to note that there is this area, but as the planning law stands now, that is treated in that way. I mean, some of you may remember Macro, was it up on the Nantgarrow industrial estate? Exactly the same. It was able to operate there, not as a retail base, but as what's known as a B1, B8, which is light industrial, commercial, and supply services. So cash and carry is exactly the same. If you've got a card, and you can only get in with a card, so...
Okay, I think we're going to move on to the motion as moved by Councillor Bird to accept officer recommendation to refuse the planning application. All those in... Sorry, wasn't seconded, and...
No, Councillor Johnson's wasn't.
Councillor Hodges... Councillor Johnson's wasn't seconded, but John's was first, so we consider that first as the motion was put forward. There was no seconding at the time, we've moved on, and then there was a motion put forward and seconded before that. So.
So obviously, Chair, that is the procedure, but it would make sense to perhaps do the contrary first and then take the substantive motion. That would make sense from an understanding perspective.
That's not the procedure that I'm chairing over and presiding over for the committee, because you didn't have the seconder, so I'm going to move to the motion as put forwards through the procedures, I'm afraid. So, as such, as uttered, all those in favour of officer recommendation for refusal, please raise your hands. As many against? And any abstentions? 3 abstentions. That falls with goes with officer recommendation. That plan application is refused. If we could ask members who remove themselves to come back into the chamber due to the declarations of interest. Okay, moving on to agenda item, planning application 2016-01092/FUL. This relates to number 18 Brunawellon in Barry's, page number 144 in your packets. Marcus.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is an application for a 2-storey extension to the side and rear of an existing dwelling within the conservation area. Sorry, it's not.
Sorry, we don't have a speaker. So.
Chairman, can I be very, very cheeky? I call this one in for determination. I am more than happy with
I'll keep quiet.
Okay, so moved. Oh. Second, all in favour? Any against? No. Okay, officer recommendation is approved. Moving on to Planning application 2017-00082/FUL. This relates to 332 Holton Road in Barry. This is page number 156 in your packets. We do have a speaker on this, but I will first turn to is it Victoria? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we did attend a site visit on this one today, so thank you to those members that attended that. This application has been called in for determination by Councillor Pamela Drake due to concerns raised by local residents. I'd also draw members' attention to the late representations, as we have a further letter of objection there relating to issues surrounding parking and access to the existing mosque, and there are several photos there that demonstrate some of the parking issues that have been experienced in the locality as the mosque currently operates. Just to let you know what the application relates to, it's for an extension to the existing property on the site which currently operates as an Islamic centre. The extension is single storey, albeit the levels on site that we saw today mean that it's actually quite high above the existing ground level of the parking and access area where it is at the moment. So it will be in line with the ground floor of the existing building, but raised quite high, so you will be visible above the wall that surrounds the premises of the property. It's a flat-roofed, simple design with obvious design features in the form of the dome and minaret that's above that on the roof of the building. The purpose of the extension is to provide an area for preparing bodies for funerals and also for families to reflect and gather at that time. Which the existing Islamic Centre doesn't have currently, those facilities to operate, and I understand therefore in the main funerals tend to take place in alternative facilities available in Cardiff and outside the area, so this is obviously to provide a facility to have those at this particular mosque. The issues are obviously set out in the report. There have been objections from local residents ranging in about different matters. Lots of concerns raised about parking in the area. The site itself does have an existing access and parking area. This extension would take up part of that area, so would restrict further the parking and manoeuvring site on site, and on its own would increase technically the parking requirement for the use, and therefore our highways officers have objected to the development. Officers have considered that issue very carefully and have come to the view that whilst the manoeuvring space on the site would be restricted by this extension, we're of the view that that is potentially a good thing in terms of the availability of parking on the site. Because of the inadequate existing access, we feel that the reduction in the use of that access is actually of a benefit. We did consider whether or not it would be necessary to just stop up that access, because there are existing problems there in terms of the visibility and its location in proximity to the road and the road junction close by and the Western Square roundabout. However, the applicants did advise us that they really do need that access for hearses to be able to come into the premises to be able to unload the bodies, and that's understandable. But obviously the frequency of those movements is going to be limited, and there is a condition restricting that is what the use of that area and the access is limited to. So we feel that on balance actually those issues are acceptable. Other issues relate to design, which obviously it is a rather unique design feature in terms of the dome and the minaret, but nevertheless it's clearly associated with the use of the building, and just because it is different to the look of the existing building by no means makes it unacceptable. You know, it can arguably be seen as an interesting design feature that actually adds to the visual interest of the existing building. So I guess that is a subjective judgment, but officers are satisfied that it is acceptable in design terms. And I think that's probably all I have to say for now, Chair.
Thank you very much. We have a resident with us wishing to speak against the motion. Julie Chorley, if you'd like to take your seat there, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak once you start. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr Chairman and councillors. Highways Officer Paul Harrison confirmed the extension will result in the loss of the only on-site 2 to 3 parking spaces. According to the council's parking standards, the extension should even require a further 2 parking spaces within the site, which are also not available. Due to lack of manoeuvring facilities, vehicles including hearses and private ambulances will be required to reverse in and out of the access into the mouth of a busy junction and oncoming traffic to the detriment of highway safety. He therefore raised an objection in relation to the highway and transportation aspect of the development. Highways Officer Harrison was contacted yesterday and verbally confirmed the proposed parking area for the hearse is a blind access and any vehicle would need to reverse in-out, and he'll be happy to argue it as an appeal. As there could possibly be an issue of safety, confirmed that he wanted to object. Local residents are extremely concerned of a potential increase in parking problems, as not even one on-site parking space will be provided for users of this building, which is reliant only on on-street parking to detriment and loss of amenity of local residents and other institutions such as the Luciana Mission of Hillary Rise. The centre already has a stated capacity of 750 people and would increase in size to 551.8 square metres. The extension's main purpose is to be for funerals to be able to take place and to use Barry Cemetery. The 100+ plots previously allocated for Islamic burial are no longer available, and no approach has been made regarding potential plots to the new extension. There is a bus stop outside the mosque, but no direct bus routes to Barry Cemetery. Therefore, people will be actually travelling by car with no parking spaces. Local residents already experience serious parking problems, including residents without driveways being unable to park on the highway near their homes, cars doing dangerous U-turns on Houghton Road instead of driving down the hill to turn around, driveways being blocked, dangerous parking, restricting sight lines, parking on pavements, etc. The case officer has not complied with the Environmental Health Department's request to condition the usage from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday to Friday in accordance with the application, as instead recommending approval during these hours on any days which has not been subject to consultation. We believe the heightened scale is not relatively modest. It will definitely be overbearing on neighbours, especially being within 15 metres from homes on Hillary Rise in a predominantly residential area. The height including dome is 10.6 metres on the north side, 12.5 metres on the south side and 10.6 metres wide, and the proposed development would result in the building being closer to neighbours on Hillary Rise than the existing building. Residents strongly dispute the case officer's assertion that the area has a multicultural nature and do not consider that a dome and minaret is appropriate at all. They do not support this drastic alteration to the character and appearance of the building and the street scene, which the case officer agreed would be highly visible. It is also on a gateway location to Barry. Due to the proposed body washing facility, we are concerned that the case officer has overruled the Environmental Health Department officer's stated requirement that a construction and environmental management plan must be provided.
Thank you very much. That's your 3 minutes. Thank you. Any points of clarification from members? If you just turn your microphone off, it's flashing red still. There we go. Thank you very much for your statement. You can step down. Thank you. Open the floor up. Councillor Drake.
I'm not going to repeat all what has been said. I called this in because a lot of residents had approached me because of the parking issue at the moment, and they felt that if this facility was extended, things were going to get worse. That was their main concern. They also mentioned in the report that about its where it's sited, there's a bus stop, there's train, but quite honestly, you know, the people are not going to be using it. They're going to, for this facility, they're going to use their cars. I just wanted to query this bit about the permitted hours. Environmental Health said 10 till 5, Monday to Friday. Would that be condition, or would it be the 7 days? Oh, sorry.
No, the condition that is suggested is limiting those hours, 10 till 5, but 7 days a week. Clearly, it's part of the faith that bodies are, that funerals happen, ideally within 24 hours of somebody passing away, or soon after. We think it would be an unreasonable restriction upon this type of use to limit it to Monday and Fridays when there is clearly going to be at times a requirement potentially for funerals to happen on Saturdays and Sundays, and given the nature of the use and the location of the site, we don't feel that it would be appropriate to restrict it to Monday and Friday. So you know, that is our officer's considered view of taking into account the environmental health officer's comments. We don't think it would be reasonable to impose it just to Monday to Friday.
The other issue is what Highways raised about the access into the site. Now, people who were there today realise how difficult it is to get out. You would have to reverse out onto the main road, because there's very high walls as well and a very narrow gate. I don't know how you would get round that, because it is quite tight there.
It is an issue that we grappled with, to be fair, and the fact remains that that access is an existing access that is currently used, and so the visibility that the highway officer has raised as a concern is currently a concern in terms of vehicles coming and going in and out of that yard area. Yes, this will limit the space at the back in terms of potential manoeuvring, but I would argue that it currently is far from ideal in terms of manoeuvring anyway, and vehicles are already restricted coming into and out of that access. What we have concluded is that actually the nature of the use of that yard now, in terms of it being used for hearses and ambulances to deliver bodies to be used for this purpose, for the funerals, is going to be few and far between, very limited in number, and would need to be managed at that point of time in terms of the vehicles reversing into and out of the site. It is not ideal, but we don't think that it would be a strong reason for refusal or to fight at appeal the use of what is an existing access that is already used for vehicles coming and going to and from the site. So for that reason, we have obviously overruled the highway officer's objection on this.
The other issues that were some of the objections were about the construction of the dome and the minaret. I could see the measurements of the dome. How high would that minaret be? I couldn't find it.
You can see from the plan here, it's not as high as the ridge of the existing building, but it would be higher than the eaves. So it depends on measure from floor area. I don't know whether it's... Can you see it? Can you see on the screen in front of you? And I believe councillor next to you has got a plan.
Councillor Johnson's passing you plans to your left there.
That it's the minaret is in old money 4 meters, 1.2 meters, 4 feet, and then the dome itself looks to me at about 4 meters. Check with Marcus, he's the one that I'm looking at.
You're not far wrong, and I think if you were to lay the easiest way to do it, I'm sure that's what Councillor Parker has done, is lay it on its on its side, and you look at the width of the extension, which is 10.6 meters. It is approximately 8 meters, I would suggest.
It's below the top height of the...
Has that helped to answer your question about heights, Councillor Drake?
Yes, that does. I'm not happy with it. I've got grave concerns about the site, particularly the parking issue, because it is a real annoyance to a lot of the neighbours around there.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson?
It's just a clarification between one on both the parking and the sort of the highways usage there, because I think the suggestion that I heard from the officer was that if it was maintained, the access there was only used for burials and for that purpose, then it would actually be used less frequently than at present. Is that the understanding? And that the parking problems that exist within the immediate area, like around many places of worship and many schools, are specific points of time. I'm just wondering, there was a question I raised this morning at the site visit, was that they didn't seem to think that it would be used particularly frequently. So I'm just trying to understand the impact, the additional impact of this proposal upon what is already existing on the site, and therefore what are the additional problems created, if any, by this?
Thank you. In terms of the parking arrangements, if I can refer you to condition 7 that is proposed, and that says the parking area shall not be used by worshippers or visitors to the mosque. So that's it, indefinite. It is only there for access to the building for hearses and ambulances and the like. At present, there isn't that restriction in place. So at present, worshippers could be using that parking area and coming and going in and out of that access. So that's where we've come to the conclusion that actually this would limit it. Now, in reality, what's happening, I couldn't confirm or otherwise, but it does appear from the photos that have been provided and anecdotally that actually the majority of the worshippers are already parking on the street and on the site. So I don't think it will have a dramatic impact one way or the other in that respect. In terms of the intensification of the use of the existing building, clearly a lot of the parking issues that are currently being experienced are in relation to the existing use and will continue irrespective of whether or not we allow this extension. We were advised today by the applicant that the likelihood and the frequency of funerals taking place, so this building being used for the purpose that it's being developed for, would be very infrequent. I think we were quoted 1 or 2 times a year. Clearly, it entirely depends on how many members of the Muslim community in the area die in that area, to put it bluntly, at any given time, and who knows whether or not that community will grow in number over over the years ahead, and indeed the likelihood of fatality rates amongst that population. Certainly those are not matters that we can control, so we have to have an open mind to the fact that those numbers could indeed increase. But like any church or crematorium or any other type of use, funerals happen in them, and they tend to happen, from my understanding, they happen during afternoon prayer ceremonies and are relatively short in terms of the length of the service that operates. It will no doubt cause a peak in vehicles at those points in times when those ceremonies or services are taking place, and that's a clear expectation from granting this use that isn't currently happening at the site. But that's not to say that it would cause a detriment to highway safety, in view of the fact that there is available on-street parking in the vicinity. There are alternatives to the car, which has been set out in the report, and therefore we really feel that a refusal on the grounds of parking would be unsustainable and certainly wouldn't be successful at appeal. Hence our officer recommendation to approve the application.
Councillor Burnett.
Not doing this very well today. Good job you there. The capacity of the actual building, how many people would they be expecting to attend a funeral, or how many actually does it cater for currently as a place of worship?
I think it already has a significant capacity. This is not going to increase the capacity of the sort of worshipping area. The building that's being proposed is an area to prepare bodies and an area for families to reflect and to sit and mourn, presumably. So it's not an area for worship that we're talking about here. That the capacity in the area of that is remaining as is. Obviously, in terms of numbers of attendees for funerals, it entirely depends on the funeral and the person who's passed, I imagine. So from what I understand it and from the photographs we've seen, the mosque is already, well attended on Fridays when the main weekly service, I don't know if that's the right terminology, but takes place. So, you know, there is already use of the building, should I say, and whilst this will increase that use because it offers the opportunity for funerals, it's not going to increase the normal prayer space area. Okay.
Any other? Councillor Penrose.
Thank you, Chair. For the benefit of residents, I'd like to clarify that in the past, this committee has always sort of considered the problems of parking. But in several instances, and this was alluded to previously by Councillor Hodges on the United Church, we have made decisions based on inadequate parking only to be turned over by Welsh Government on appeal. And I think it's, you know, I'd like to sort of point out to members of the public attending that we have every sympathy, I'm sure everybody on this panel, with the parking situations. But continually in these sort of instances, we have to consider the fact that if we did go against officers' recommendations, we are likely to be turned over on appeal.
Thank you, Councillor Penrose. Marcus.
Yes, that's a very valid point made by Councillor Penrose. And I think this refers back to the period we are in terms of planning policy. Some years back we had parking standards which were minimum standards, so developments had to accord with that minimum standard of parking to achieve basically a favourable recommendation in terms of the committee. In the mid-2000s that was changed by policy, and it was changed to a maximum standard. So the parking guidelines we now have set out a maximum parking provision, but no minimum. And the reason for that was to encourage sustainable development and discourage the use of the car. Now, whether we agree with that or disagree with it, I'm sure there are many of us who disagree as well as agree. The issue is that when appeals are heard, inspectors do tend to very strongly err on the side of the maximum parking argument set out in the Planning Policy Wales document, and as Councillor quite rightly said, a very recent appeal decision on United Reformed Church, where a committee took a decision to refuse an application because of a lack of parking, has been overturned, and the use allowed with no parking at all. So it is a relevant point. It is very, very, you know, however you look at it, it's unfortunate that parking is very weak and carries very little weight on its own to refuse an application.
Councillor Birds.
Chair, I'd like to move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Second, Councillor Thomas. Councillor Parker, we'll just hear from the couple of speakers I've already had down. Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, what I would say is if you can look and find that photograph, you will see that quite clearly the parking goes as far as the end of the houses, and clearly above it there is more than adequate parking. And although I think we could consider at this time, if there was a study in relation to parking and yellow lines along where the two taxis are, that would overcome the problem of any access to that. And that's dangerous in any event. I mean, that shouldn't be allowed irrespective of the application. So I'd recommend that a study was undertaken just to see whether we could improve the condition for the... Look, I don't think it's a condition. Looking at Marcus, the answer is no.
Thank you, Councillor Parker. If I move, Councillor Johnson.
I was actually going to say that in the context of Councillor Bird's already got there in terms of moving it, but I was going to just remind people that the dome and the minarets won't be used for emitting or amplifying music or sounds. There's going to be obscured glazing overlooking Hillary Terrace, isn't it? I was going to say that I'm pleased with clause 4 about the look of the building, because actually the look of the building is something that's very important. I think it doesn't look very good at the moment, and I think that's important. And with regards to the parking, frankly, I'd send some of our civic enforcement officers round there, or police round there, and actually enforce the parking regulations at the appropriate times, because this is a clear and ongoing issue for local residents. Then that something that should be done by the CEOs and by the police. And because the infrequency of additional traffic as a result of this is probably not so great as to warrant refusal, but it warrants dealing with.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. I'll move this to a vote on the motion as moved to go with officer recommendation with the resultant planning conditions as noted in the report. All those in favour, please raise your hands. And those against? I don't think there are any abstentions. Thank you. That goes with officer recommendation. Thank you for coming along to speak as well. I'll move on to application 2017-00086/FUL, Tresillian Wood, Dimlands Road, St Donats. This is page number 171 in your packets. Victoria.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you again to those members that came out to the site visit this morning for this one. Just to remind you that there are some late representations on this. We received a letter that had been compiled by the applicant and sent to us via the Community Council, who did raise some concerns about the content of the letter, but hopefully members have had a chance to digest that in the late representations. So, as a reminder, that this planning application seeks to vary a previous consent. Well, it's a fresh application, but it relates to a previous consent that was granted for a tourism use at the site. The full details are set out in the description of development on page 173. So the application seeks to increase the height and alter the design of 3 of the originally approved lodges, as well as to remove one of the cabans and replace 2 cabans with 2 shepherd huts instead. We saw examples of the cabans, the lodges and the shepherd huts today on the site. They're spread around the perimeter of the site, which is quite an enclosed field, which we saw today. You can't see a lot of the site from the main highway, the Dimlands Road. There are a lot of trees all around the perimeter of the site. The application also seeks to amend the consent to allow the cabins to be used throughout the year, in addition to the lodges that already had consent throughout the whole year. The previous consent also had consent to use part of the field area for tents, and that remains unchanged in this proposal. There have been objections to this application, which are set out in the report at page 176. Council's received 10 representations to the application, issues surrounding noise, traffic issues, the access, the visual impact and appearance of the structures, ecology impact, litter, the drinks licence, which is obviously subject to a separate procedure, and the fact that some of the works had already commenced on the site, which are subject to a separate enforcement case to investigate that. But obviously the officers' issues have been set out throughout the report, and the conclusion and recommendation is that the application should be approved subject to a number of conditions.
Thank you very much. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. As the late representations indicates, this application has had some considerable debate by the local community and the applicants. As a councillor, I have to stand on both sides, and clearly I wasn't expecting to be part of the planning committee this year, but that certainly puts me in a different position. Thankfully, I can say that I haven't predetermined or made a view about it. So some of the comments I am going to make will be on both sides, I suppose. But I'd like just to confirm, for the benefit of the objections, I suppose, really, what they've mentioned the highways as an issue with increased, visitors or whatever. I'm just wondering, if there is an issue, what can be done about it? Yeah.
Marcus.
That's fine. Firstly, I point to page 176. Our highway development officers have not objected to the alterations. This has been granted consent for this use previously. We're talking about the changes to that, which are relatively minor, certainly in terms of any traffic impacts and associated with that. you know, it is a relatively low-key, small-scale tourism venture where you wouldn't expect traffic generation to be significant. There is a main highway accessing the site. We just don't see that highway issues are going to be a problem here in terms of the nature of the use and the frequencies of vehicles coming and going to this type of use. So we really don't think any sort of objection on highway grounds can be sustained.
Councillor Williams.
Sorry, if you don't mind. I'm of the mind to agree with you, as just to put the residents or the local community, you know, that's a judgment, isn't it? So if there were occasions where we decided there was issues, for example, you know, the residents from the site moving and walking through to Lancet or whatever, that became an issue. Is there anything that can be done, or is it, once this application is done, that's the end of it?
Yeah, primarily it's up to the Highway Authority to keep under continual review the safety of our entire road network. We're talking about the adopted highway along the frontage of the site to Dimlands Road. It's not just accessing this site, it's accessing houses along that road, and obviously the entire education facility and art centre at St Donat's. You know, it is an adopted highway. If there were any sort of highway safety issues or anything else, then the Highway Authority could consider any number of traffic regulation orders and so on. Have to say, I think it's very unlikely to be the case as a result of this use, and in terms of the nature of those rural roads where, you know, these kind of uses exist and exist in harmony with all the other surrounding uses in the area.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Just there is one other matter, and I just need to make it clear for the planning panel that although it's not discussed here because it's part of a licensing, there is that point just that some of the residents are concerned, because if you look at on page 174, there is a property on the edge of the field there, which, you know, is next to the field. So I just need assurance, because this is a public meeting, that there are controls in place that should there be any instance with the licensing, that can be dealt with, as with the environmental side of things.
Yeah, I mean, it's under separate jurisdiction to this planning committee, and under the Licensing Act there are separate powers, and also we also have environmental health powers in terms of statutory noise nuisance and things like that, which would be separate and outside this control. Okay.
Thank you. Any other members wishing to comment? Do I see anyone to move the recommendation? Councillor Penrose, second Councillor Wilkinson. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Can we get Andrew back in before we move to the next one? Now move on to application 2017-00242/FUL, Windrush 9 Crag Eros Road in Ogmore by Sea, page 188 in your packets. Ask Marcus to talk us in on this.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is an application for 2 extensions to an existing property at 9 Cragarius Road, Ogmore by Sea. They are rear extensions. It is a relatively long frontaged bungalow. You can probably see on the plan that Vicky's put on the screen there. The two extensions, one is relatively small, single-storey extension to one side of the property, and then a larger extension which is 1.5 stories, so it includes accommodation at both ground floor and a bedroom in the attic space of the extension. Those extensions are, well, the longest extension is approximately 10.3 metres in length. It's 5.3 metres wide and 6.3 metres high, and it's finished to match the dwelling itself. The other extension, the smaller extension, is only 2.3 metres long and 4.6 metres wide. There are letters of objection which have been submitted as late representation, 2 letters of objection, I believe, in your bundle, so you can view those. They include photographs of submitted by the objectors of what they think the extension will look like. Clearly, the report has gone through the issues surrounding the extension and the impact on neighbouring properties. It is considered, obviously, that the greatest impact would be from the longer central extension. However, because this is centrally located within the property itself and its garden, it does have only limited impact, and the report goes through that in great detail, explaining what we consider to be the impact. One key issue for members, which has been raised by one of the objectors, is obviously the loss of the view of the sea because of the erection of the extension. But obviously members will be aware, following the training, that unfortunately loss of view is not a material planning matter and can't be considered in the planning process. So we are recommending approval of this proposal. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Marcus. Any members wishing to speak? Councillor Bird.
I was asked by the previous ward member to call this in. She had some concerns over the development, and I have done. I have looked at the plans, and whilst I do sympathise with the person who is losing the view, there is very little we can do about it as a planning authority or committee. So I personally have no objection.
Thank you, Councillor Bird. Any other members wish to comment? Councillor Johnson.
So I'm just going to ask just a quick clarification on the privacy elements from the Juliet balcony and how that impacts. I'm sure it's in the bundle somewhere, but just clarification would help me.
Yes, Chair. Thank you. It has been dealt with. If you notice, we've actually gone through, or the report writer has gone through each property that adjoins it and spells out how they feel the impact would, what the impact would be. I think the Juliet balcony is dealt with in respect of.
196.
There we are, 196, quite right. Number 11, Craigerrios Road, and it does say the Juliet balcony would offer some views toward the rear garden of number 11, the neighbouring property. However, it is considered the extension would be an acceptable distance from this garden and ensure that it would not be unacceptably overlooked. Similarly, the angle and distance to the windows would not conflict with the standards set out in the Council's supplementary planning guidance. So, yes, there is some element of overlooking, but it's at a distance that means that it wouldn't be unacceptable.
We have a motion to go with and accept officer recommendation from Councillor Bird, seconded by Councillor Penrose. I see all those in favour of that recommendation. Any against? Any abstention? One abstention. Thank you. That recommendation passes. Moving on to planning application 2017-00338 Strass FUL Hensel Golf Academy, on page 202 in your packets.
Thank you, Chair. The reason this comes before Planning Committee is it falls outside the scheme of delegation. It's actually a relatively small-scale development we're looking at. Probably the best plan is on page 203, which sets out the layout of the course, and you can see on the plan on the screen where that is located. So this is a proposal for. Now I've got to get the description right because Chair told me that. There's a type of crazy golf. This is not it. This is adventure golf.
Adventure golf.
Yes, this is adventure golf.
Adventure golf.
And not crazy golf. It's a proposal for 18 holes of adventure golf. It's associated with the existing Hensel Golf Academy, which is a driving range. It's got its own car park, and this is on an area of scrub just beyond that. Obviously, the use is related to the existing operation there at Hensel, We've consulted with various officers, including our tourism team, who are supportive of the application. Obviously, Hensall is an area where we have a number of tourism-related uses, and we feel that this is an acceptable addition to the tourism offer in that area, and we are recommending approval subject to a number of conditions.
Councillor Penrose.
As there are no objections, Chair, I'd like to move officers' recommendations.
Thank you. Councillor Parker.
Sorry, one small concern. It says the main part of the site relates to the contoured areas, artificial grass in each hole, but also we're going to get parts of aeroplanes, 4x4 and jeeps. Now, we've got no control over that, and if we had a big proliferation of that, it could become a problem. And I'm just wondering whether or not we shouldn't have a condition which would help us control. I mean, we don't want a jeep there that quietly rusts away, and we don't want an aeroplane that quietly rusts away. And I couldn't see a condition that would give us confidence to control it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Parker. Marcus.
There's no reason why we couldn't add a condition which requires removal of those items once the use ceases.
With that condition added, do I have a seconder to Councillor Penrose's motion? Councillor Parker, thank you. All those in favour of accepting the application? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Moving on to our final application, 2017-00399/FUL, relates to Greenfields, Llanmaes. It's page number 215 in your packets. Marcus.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this application is coming before you because it has a dual recommendation in respect of the application as well as seeking enforcement action. It is an application for the retention of a new means of enclosure at the front of an existing property, Greenfields, Llanmaes. It is for the retention of a close boarded fence of a height of 1.8 metres, sitting above an existing 0.8 metre high stone wall, and it runs for approximately 28 metres in length. It is just outside the Llanmaes conservation area. It was the subject of an enforcement complaint, and following that complaint, the applicants have submitted this planning application. Your officers have looked at it within the street scene and considered it having regard to the immediate vicinity, and some members will be aware that we have in the past dealt with similar front fences which are considered to be high and can affect the amenity of the area. In this particular case we've looked at it, we do consider it is both unnecessary and unacceptable in its appearance, and that the similar effect could be achieved by a hedge or other perhaps lighter structure. There we have taken similar action in the past, and we do consider that this should be refused and that enforcement action should be authorised for the removal of the unauthorised timber fence to the front of the property, and the removal of any waste resulting from that operation.
Thank you very much. Do I have any members wishing to comment on the application and the resulting enforcement action? Councillor Thomas moves recommendation and Councillor Wilson second. All those in favour of recommendation? And that's unanimous. Thank you very much for your attendance, and I wasn't at the previous planning committees where they went into the night, but I'm sure you'll agree we've had a very pleasurable time of day to be discussing some of the items that have come up. So thank you all for your attendance, and I look forward to seeing you at the next meeting. Thank you.